The Order of the Phoenix movie had to leave out hundreds of crucial plot points, characters, and lines that they just couldn't fit into a theatrical runtime. And unfortunately, amongst those omissions are crazy scenes like Dudley punching Harry during the Dementor attack, Aunt Petunia admitting that she knows what Dementors and the wizard prison Azkaban even is, and the arrival of an anonymous howler. Not for Harry, but for Aunt Petunia herself. These important moments take place within only the first few pages of the Order of the Phoenix book, and should have been shown on screen, but sadly got written out of the story for time. So join me today as we dive into the opening of this iconic film and compare it to the first 3 chapters of the book, finding every single difference between them along the way. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 60 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. If you're new here, this is my channel, Fact or Fantasy Harry Potter, a place where we discuss all things wizarding. And in this specific series, I've covered the first 4 Harry Potter books and movies, finding over 800 changes between them so far. So if you've missed the first 59 episodes, don't worry, you can find all of them on my channel after you're done watching this video. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But before we get into all of the crucial changes the movie made, let's recap what actually happens in the opening scene of the film. Just like almost all of the other movies so far, we start the movie by panning down into Little Whinging, the town where Harry and the Dursleys live. It's a hot day, and we see Harry walking toward a park and then sitting on a swing as a news reporter is heard in the background discussing the heat. After a bit, Dudley and his gang appear, and Harry confronts them about how they beat up yet another 10-year-old. But Dudley has the perfect retort, making fun of Harry for talking in his sleep. The memory of Cedric and the graveyard cause Harry to act out, whipping out his wand and approaching Dudley, which makes Dudley nervous, but all of his friends laugh. However, things escalate pretty quickly as the sunny hot day quickly turns into a cloudy sky and pouring rain. Dudley's gang run off, and Dudley and Harry run together toward a sheltered underpass to get out of the rain. Things get pretty cold, and we see ice covering the lights, and a Dementor suddenly swoops down on Harry, lifting him up off the ground. Dudley soon gets attacked as well after slipping on some ice and falling to the ground. Thankfully, Harry still has a hold of his wand and uses it to cast a Patronus charm, scaring off the 2 Dementors. Right after this attack, Mrs. Fig appears and tells Harry to keep his wand out. Harry is shocked by this revelation that his neighbor is a squib and is working for Dumbledore, but he helps Dudley back to the house. Mrs. Fig leaves them at the driveway, and after going inside, Dudley blames Harry for the attack, since he can't see Dementors and thinks Harry did it with his wand. Uncle Vernon tries to kick Harry out, but his rant is interrupted by an owl bringing a letter from the Ministry. The letter opens up and tells Harry that due to the magic he just performed in the presence of a Muggle, he is expelled from Hogwarts. The movie cuts as the Dursleys take their son to the hospital, and we see Harry hitting the wall in his room. Then we see a brief dream sequence as Harry relives the graveyard, and then the Order come and pick up Harry, taking him to Grimmauld Place. And that is pretty much everything we're covering in the opening sequence of the Order of the Phoenix movie. So let's waste no time and dive right into the first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. First up, we've got quite a few missing characters, most of whom, but not all, are in the advance guard who have come to escort Harry to Grimmauld Place. We're missing Mundungus Fletcher, Remus Lupin, Elphias Doge, Daedalus Diggle, Emmeline Vance, Hestia Jones, Sturgis Podmore, Sirius Black, Arthur Weasley, and finally Ron and Hermione. Now let me clarify some things here. First, Elphias Doge and Emmeline Vance are technically shown in the movie. You can see that there are 2 extra members of the Order who come to pick up Harry, but they don't talk and they're never named. In the book though, as we'll unpack in the plot changes section, there are quite a few more people and all of them are introduced to Harry. Elphias Doge will of course be more important as he shows up in the Deathly Hallows later on. Then as for Arthur Weasley, Ron and Hermione, and Sirius, they are all included in the book by letter as they write to Harry at one point or another, but they aren't there physically. Moving on to timeline, we have the significant distinction that in the book, Harry is locked away in his room for 4 days in between the date of the Dementor attack and the date of him getting taken away by the Order. Significant in terms of how different it is, because obviously in the movie it's the same night. But is it important? Not really. Nothing of value happens during those 4 days really, except Harry sending letters to people. So if you're trying to condense time for a film, I think this was an acceptable omission. Then for location, we actually have a pass this week, as the movie at least kept things accurate with having everything take place at the Dursleys. But we don't get so lucky with the plot. as there are about 18 different changes, omissions, and revisions that they made for the film. But first, I need to give a massive disclaimer, as I always do, that I'm not here to replace the books or go through things word for word with you. Especially when it comes to dialogue, I think we all can understand that a movie can't just rip things word for word from the book. Otherwise, it would be a 5-hour movie with a lot of monologuing. But if there is a dialogue change that directly affects the plot or a key character trait, I'll do my best to mention it. For everything else, I highly recommend you check out the audiobooks on Audible. Whether it's Jim Dale, Stephen Fry, or the new full cast special editions, the audiobooks are a great immersive way to relive these epic stories. And if you're going through these chapters with me, it's kind of like a book club, episode by episode. Using the link in my description, you can get a free trial and a free book of your choice. It's absolutely no cost to you, and it supports me and the channel at the same time. So it's a win-win. On another note, I want to give a huge shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, and the rest of my Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Now, with that being said, let's dive into the plot changes. First up, we have to set the scene for where Harry is at during the opening of this book. We read that during this blazing hot summer's day, Harry found himself outside lying underneath his uncle and aunt's open window in the bushes. This way, no one could see him, no one could bother him, and he could try to listen to the news on the TV without his aunt and uncle yelling at him. But put a pin in the news thing for just a second, because our next change is a small omitted detail about a sudden loud crack being heard near Harry. To Harry, this sounds exactly like someone apparating or disapparating, so he instinctively grabs his wand and bolts upright. Well, unfortunately for Harry, he had forgotten where he was in the sudden excitement of the noise and bolted right up into the window which hung out above him. This caused him excruciating blinding pain and made another loud noise, alerting his aunt and uncle to his presence. Vernon ran over to the window and grabbed Harry by the neck, angrily asking him what in the blazes he's doing outside there with his wand. Obviously, they're under the impression that Harry made the loud cracking noise before. However, Uncle Vernon is trying to quietly choke out Harry and question him because it is during the middle of the day and they're in perfect view of all of the neighbors. Eventually, Harry got inside to be properly questioned by Vernon and Petunia, who were filled with rage at the noise and wanted to know exactly what he was doing outside the window. And this is where we can go back to the pin that I told you to make earlier about the news. You see, something we don't get at the beginning of the movie is all the context surrounding Harry's last few weeks at Privet Drive. We read that Harry had gone without any news, no information in letters from Ron, Hermione, or Sirius. Nothing in the Daily Prophet, which he had been paying for so he could stay up to date on Voldemort's movements. But Voldemort wasn't moving or doing anything, to Harry's knowledge, so Harry had been resorting to listening to the Muggle news, but every time he tried to watch the TV inside, his uncle and aunt got furious with him, asking why in the world a boy his age would care about the news, citing that their dear Dudley wouldn't even be able to name the Prime Minister, and that's how it should be. It was unnatural for a teenage boy to care about the happenings of the world. But Harry knew that the last time Voldemort rose to power, it began with strange disappearances of Muggles and wizards alike. So if Voldemort was acting, it was bound to turn up on the Muggle news at some point. Anyway, Harry explained to his aunt and uncle that he was outside under the window trying to listen to the news. But before they could get too upset, he walked outside and started down the road, eager to get away from the house for a bit. And this is what brings us to Harry eventually meeting up with Dudley. And that is our next change, because this encounter is quite different in the book, as it even includes Dudley nearly knocking Harry out. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. First, Harry sees Dudley and his gang across the street, but he doesn't go up to them. As much as Harry would want to go pick a fight with Dudley and watch him squirm in front of his friends, he doesn't do it. We read that Dudley, who was morbidly obese in the previous year, had finally found a way to put his weight to good use. He had become the boxing champion in his grade and used this newfound talent on 10-year-olds. But Dudley was very scared of Harry, so unlike the movie, he and his gang never taunted Harry. But Harry was a good boy and waited for Dudley's gang to head home before he met up with his cousin. Knowing that he needed to arrive home at the same time as Dudley, or else suffer the wrath of his aunt and uncle, he decided to walk home with him. During this walk, Harry taunts and makes fun of Dudley, which was Harry's only way to vent his frustration. But this specific moment backfired on Harry as Dudley came back at him, telling Harry that he's been crying in his sleep. Similarly to the movie, Harry pulls out his wand and threatens Dudley, who tries to stay calm and say that Harry isn't allowed to use magic, but he's obviously very scared. And it's right at this moment that the weather seems to drastically change. It goes from scorching hot and sunny to cloudy and freezing cold, and Dudley assumes that Harry is doing magic. Then it suddenly turned dark, and Dudley says that he's been blinded and he can't see. Harry, who also can't see now, keeps telling him to shut up so he can focus and look around for attackers. But Dudley is convinced that it is Harry who is doing this, and in a split second, Dudley sends fists flying and knocks Harry upside the head, causing him to fall to the ground and nearly lose consciousness. And on top of that, he loses his wand. Harry, who can also barely see anything, could only hear the footsteps of Dudley running away and running into something. Then, after feeling something cold behind him that could only mean one thing, Harry shouted at Dudley to keep his mouth shut, and frantically searched on the ground for his wand. Eventually, Harry does find his wand, and that brings us to another change, which is the fact that Harry does not cast a fully formed Patronus on his first try. It takes him multiple attempts, and he nearly gives up as both Dementors almost kiss him and Dudley. But on his third and final try, he finally produces his stag, which charges at the Dementor, attacking it, and then back at Dudley's Dementor. Also, small side note here, I don't really know what that spell is that Harry uses against the Dementor at first. He pokes it with his wand and sparks fly out and make it back off. However, I was under the impression that Dementors could only be deterred by one thing, which is a Patronus. So not only does this little firework thing not happen in the book, but I don't even think it would have made a difference. Anyway, now that the attack is over, we can move on to our next change as Mrs. Fig is introduced. This is one of the more important omissions of these scenes, as technically we should have also been introduced to Mundungus Fletcher. We learn from Fig that Mundungus was on watch duty for Harry under an invisibility cloak, but after getting a tip about a large amount of cauldrons that he could acquire, he disapparated. That was the loud crack that Harry had heard earlier on. But as Mrs. Fig, Harry, and Dudley make their way slowly back to Privet Drive, Mundungus apparates back in front of them, and Mrs. Fig goes off on him, hitting him all over with her purse. He is shocked to hear the news about what happened while he was away, and he quickly disapparates to alert Dumbledore. And now, Harry and Dudley are back at number 4 Privet Drive. Dudley makes it to the front door, where he promptly vomits in front of his parents, who obviously become extremely worried, asking him what happened. Harry attempts to sneak off, but Dudley points at him before he can, causing Uncle Vernon to round on him, completely enraged. And this is where we get not one, but 5 owls delivering letters back to back. Let me give you a brief rundown of the letters, and then we'll go through the order of events in more detail. The first owl delivered the letter from the Ministry that we actually see in the movie. The second owl delivered a letter from Arthur Weasley telling Harry to stay put and that Dumbledore is sorting things out at the Ministry. The third owl is from the Ministry again, retracting their initial letter and stating that Harry is suspended from Hogwarts pending a formal hearing. Then the fourth owl is from Sirius, telling Harry not to leave the house. And finally, the fifth owl is a howler of all things, and not even for Harry. It's a howler for Aunt Petunia. But before we can get to the howler, let's rewind and slow things down, going back to the very first owl, because there's a couple of changes regarding this initial letter. Although a small difference, it's important to note that in the book, Harry's letter does not open up and talk out loud. Harry simply reads it and then lets his uncle read it after him. Secondly, the letter states that Harry is not only expelled from Hogwarts, but that Ministry officials will be showing up momentarily to snap Harry's wand. Remember, when expelled from Hogwarts, your wand also gets snapped, and you're technically not allowed to do magic anymore. This is sort of a weird rule because in most of the world, you don't even need a wand to do magic, and there are loads of witches and wizards who don't even go to Hogwarts. So if someone is expelled, why not just let them homeschool? But anyway, this isn't the time to get into the convoluted political mess of the wizarding world. Back to Harry and his current problems, we come to our next change, which is that Harry prepares to run away. In his mind, this is his only choice, otherwise his wand will be snapped and he will lose everything good that has ever happened in his life. So he prepares to go, much to his uncle's displeasure, as he still wants an explanation of what happened to his son. But soon enough, Mr. Weasley's letter arrives, and Harry is told to stay put and that Dumbledore is working everything out. So Harry does exactly that, and stays put, giving his relatives a bit of whiplash because they were under the impression that he was leaving. But now that Harry is staying, Vernon finally gets an explanation from him about what happened to Dudley. Harry explains that he did use magic, but not on Dudley. Vernon is very confused because he can't understand why Harry would have done magic unless it was on Dudley. So Harry continues the story and tells them that they were attacked by Dementors. Again, Vernon is confused and thinks that Harry is just making these creatures up to cover for what he did to Dudley. But this is where we get one of the most surprising moments in the entire Harry Potter series. I know that's a bold statement, but it's true, because to Harry's complete astonishment, Aunt Petunia backs him up, and before she can stop herself, she blurts out that Dementors are real and they guard the wizard prison of Azkaban. After saying it out loud, she looks disgusted and shocked with herself, and Vernon is caught totally off guard. The fact that his wife, who was so adamantly against the wizarding world, just spoke about it in such a nonchalant and knowledgeable way hits Vernon like a freight train. Not only is this a partial betrayal from his wife, but his accusations against Harry are now unfounded as Petunia is supporting Harry's argument. It's pretty much the most unlikely possible scenario that Harry could have ever dreamt up. And he is also dumbfounded at his aunt's outburst. He asks her how she knew that, and Petunia reveals with disgust that she once overheard James telling Lily about it. But this brings us to our next change, because after this, the question must be answered: why did Dementors attack in the first place? Harry then informs his aunt that Voldemort has returned, something that he had not told them at all, as they had refused to hear anything about his school year or anything about the wizarding world. He tells them that just weeks ago, Voldemort returned and Harry himself saw it happen. Petunia gets a look of deeply horrified understanding on her face as Harry locks eyes with her and tells her this. Harry realizes for the first time that despite how horrible his aunt was, she had also felt the incredible loss that Voldemort brought. Vernon, on the other hand, really doesn't sense the tone of the room as he puts two and two together. This Voldemort is the man who killed Petunia's sister, and the reason that Harry is with them. Voldemort is back and wants to kill Harry, who now lives under Vernon's roof, a valuable roof that he would rather not have blown up. And slowly but surely, Vernon comes to the logical conclusion that Harry must go. He's reached his limit, and he won't put his wife or son in danger for Harry's sake. And I've gotta say that out of all the abusive and horrible things that Vernon Dursley has done to Harry, this makes the most logical sense. But Harry is now in a tough spot. Despite telling them that he was leaving only minutes prior, he now is under strict orders from both Mr. Weasley and Sirius, whose letter had arrived before this, to stay put and not leave the house. And this is where the fifth and final letter comes into play: a howler. But not for Harry, who of course expected any owl post to be for him. After all, who would be writing his muggle relatives? In this moment, the sender is anonymous, and the letter simply shouts 4 words: "Remember my last, Petunia." This further confuses Uncle Vernon and Harry, who both look at Petunia in astonishment. But at this howler, Petunia seems to have come to a decision, and she tells Vernon that Harry must stay with them. Harry tries to question her about the howler, but she gets back to her usual nasty self and doesn't answer him, instead telling him to go to his room. Now, usually I try to keep things somewhat left unexplained, so that way we can go through the story together episode by episode and reveal things as we go. But in this case, I will reveal that this howler is of course from Albus Dumbledore, who seems to have predicted that the Dursleys would try to kick Harry out after this. If you've read the series before, then you know that there's a type of protection that lies on the home due to Lily's sacrifice and a bit of magic from Dumbledore himself. However, the magic only works as long as the blood of Lily, which runs in Petunia, allows Harry to stay. The day that Petunia would disown Harry is the day that Voldemort would be able to attack number 4 Privet Drive. But anyway, this will be further explained later on, so we won't go too deep into it right now. All I'll say is that this sequence of events is very important, and I'm sad that we never saw it in the movie. It slightly humanizes Aunt Petunia and also shows the deeper complexity in this attack. It just wasn't as simple as the movie shows. Anyway, after Harry gets locked in his room, we have another change, and that is the timeline difference that I mentioned earlier, which is that Harry is locked away for 4 days. Aunt Petunia would slide meals through the cat flap every day to keep him alive, but other than that, Harry wasn't allowed out. In the movie, it's made to look like Harry is given free rein. In fact, they even go as far as to show a key in Harry's side of the door, insinuating that he has the ability to lock himself in from the inside, which is laughable. If you know anything about the Dursleys in the previous books, you know that Harry had about a dozen locks on the outside of his bedroom door, not the other way around. But now we only have a handful of changes left, all regarding Harry's escape from the Dursleys. First, the Dursleys don't take Dudley to a doctor, they actually leave a few days later with Dudley seemingly recovered, for a best-kept suburban lawn competition that they supposedly were shortlisted for. This is entirely made up, and we learn that Tonks was the one who sent them the fake invite. It would give the Order just enough time to get Harry out of the house before the Dursleys would realize that there was no suburban lawn competition. Next, we miss a decent amount of conversation in the book between the members of the Order and Harry, specifically with Tonks. In the book, they have about 15 minutes of waiting for the all-clear signal before they can leave. Also, I just want to mention real quick that Harry in the book is wary of Mad-Eye Moody. After all, the previous year, he had a traumatic experience with the fake Moody. So it isn't until Remus Lupin shows himself that Harry is convinced these are the good guys. Lupin introduces all the members of the Order who volunteered to get him, and Harry meets Tonks, who goes to help him pack up his things in his room. She shares with him that she is an Auror, which Harry is very impressed by, and she tells him that she's a Metamorph Magus, someone who can change their looks on command. Eventually, after packing up and getting the signal from the other members of the Order, they get on their brooms and ride off. Oh, and by the way, Moody puts a disillusionment charm on Harry, which makes him nearly invisible. Obviously, that doesn't happen in the movie. Now, after they leave, I need to mention a distinct difference in their flight. In the book, they stay high in the clouds as Moody is paranoid about being seen. In fact, they keep going in loops in weird directions to try and throw off anyone who might follow them. But eventually, they get to Grimmauld Place. The key difference here is that in the movie, we get the part of them flying over the river and past a boat. This is a bit ridiculous from a story perspective because J.K. Rowling was so incredibly clear about Moody being paranoid and not wanting to be anywhere within the sight of Muggles or Death Eaters. But from a movie perspective, it's way better. Just watching them fly through the clouds in the night sky wouldn't have been very interesting or entertaining. So then it's just a question of what you want out of the movie: realism or entertainment. Anyway, we've now come to the final change, which is another small one, but one that has to do with the original lore of the story. And that is that in the book, Harry has to read a piece of paper that says the address of the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix on it. It's only after he reads this bit of parchment that he looks up and sees number 12 Grimmauld Place appear. He learns afterwards that Dumbledore is secret keeper for the Order, so no one can find Grimmauld Place unless Dumbledore himself tells them the location. Dumbledore had written the address on that piece of parchment that Harry had just read, so therefore Harry could now see the headquarters. This change I don't understand as much. Maybe because the previous movies hadn't explained the Fidelius charm that James and Lily used to hide when being hunted by Voldemort years prior. Or maybe they thought it would just make Moody look cool if he tapped his staff on the ground a few times to make the building appear. I don't know, but regardless, I think they easily could have done the paper thing without explaining the charm in its entirety. It would have held true to the book without having to dive into the specifics of the magic. After all, we aren't told why exactly Moody tapping his staff on the ground would cause the building to appear. What's the magic behind that? We don't really need to know because we're kind of just taught to suspend belief and logic for the Harry Potter story. So they just as easily could have done the parchment thing with the address. Anyway, enough of my rant, because that wraps up all of the changes for this episode. If this was your first time watching, congrats! You made it through one episode, and now you've got 59 more to go back and watch. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and stay up to date with this series as we go through every single page of the Order of the Phoenix. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.